John had worked as a gatekeeper for almost 5 years, and his days were always the same from the moment the sun rose until the moment it disappeared behind the tall buildings. He sat in his small wooden guard booth by the entrance to a rich neighborhood, watching cars go in and out while keeping a small notebook to write down every visitor's name and time of arrival. He never complained, because the job gave him enough money to take care of his little daughter Lily, who was only 8 years old and the most important person in his life. Every morning he would wake up in the small room behind the gatehouse where he lived with Lily and make her a simple breakfast of bread and tea. Then he would walk her to the school bus stop and wait until she was safely on board before going back to his post. He liked watching her smile and wave at him through the bus window because it was the brightest moment of his day. After she left, he would sit quietly listening to the sound of passing traffic and the singing of birds from the trees nearby. John's life was not exciting, but it was peaceful, and he was grateful for that. He had already been through enough storms in his past. His wife had died when Lily was only a baby, and since then he had promised himself he would never let anything harm his daughter. He lived simply, wearing the same blue uniform every day and carrying an old thermos filled with warm coffee to keep him awake during the long hours at the gate. Sometimes the residents of the neighborhood would greet him politely, but most just passed by without a word. But everything began to change one rainy evening when the air felt heavy and the sky was dark. Even though it was not yet night, John noticed the clouds moving fast, as if they were in a hurry to cover the moon. The sound of the rain tapping on the roof of his booth was calming at first, until he heard something unusual: the loud screech of tires, followed by a sharp thud that echoed through the empty street. He stood up quickly and peered through the gate to see a black luxury car speeding toward him, its headlights cutting through the rain like two sharp blades of light. The car stopped suddenly just a few meters from the gate, and before John could react, the passenger door swung open. A woman stepped out, stumbling slightly, her hair wet and sticking to her face. She was wearing a long dress that clung to her body from the rain, and her eyes darted around in fear. She looked like someone running from a nightmare. She ran toward John, her shoes splashing water from the puddles on the ground. Her voice was trembling as she spoke. "Please help me," she whispered. "Please don't let him find me." John's heart began to beat faster. He had no idea who she was or what trouble she was in, but he could see the desperation in her eyes. It was the same kind of fear he had once felt when he almost lost Lily to sickness years ago, the kind that made a person willing to do anything to survive. The woman looked over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. Her hands were shaking, and her breath was quick. She stepped closer, and her voice dropped even lower. "Please, I beg you, hide me." John glanced at the road behind her, and his stomach tightened through the heavy curtain of rain. He saw another vehicle approaching. This one was a large black SUV, moving slowly, as if searching for something or someone. Its dark windows made it impossible to see who was inside, but John felt a chill crawl up his spine. He knew that whatever was happening was dangerous, and that helping this woman might put him in trouble. Yet something inside him refused to send her away. He opened the small wooden door to the back of his booth and motioned for her to go inside quickly. The woman hesitated for only a second before stepping in, her wet clothes leaving small dark spots on the floor. John shut the door quietly just as the SUV pulled up to the gate. The rain made it hard to hear, but the low hum of the engine was steady and slow. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing an expensive suit that looked strange in the storm. His shoes sank slightly into the wet ground as he walked toward John. His eyes were cold and sharp, like a knife cutting through ice. "Good evening," the man said, his voice calm but heavy. "Have you seen a woman pass by here? She is about this tall, with dark hair, and wearing a long dress." His gaze never left John's face, as if searching for a lie. John could feel his palms sweating. He knew that if he told the truth, the woman inside his booth would be caught and taken away. But if he lied, there was no telling what this man might do. Still, John found himself shaking his head slowly and saying, "No, sir, I have not seen anyone like that tonight." The man studied him for a long moment, the rain dripping from his short hair onto his shoulders. Then, without another word, he turned around and got back into the SUV. The vehicle rolled away slowly, disappearing into the darkness. John stood there for a few seconds, letting the rain wash over his face, before turning back to the booth. Inside, the woman sat on the small wooden chair, her hands gripping the edge tightly, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and relief. John did not know it yet, but this night would be the first step toward a story that would change his life forever. John closed the small wooden door of his booth slowly, as if he feared the sound might carry into the dark street outside. The rain was still falling, but softer now, making a steady rhythm on the metal roof inside the booth. The woman sat with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, shivering as the damp fabric of her dress clung to her skin. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, and she seemed lost in thought or perhaps in fear. Lily was asleep in the small back room, where she usually stayed when John worked the late shift, and John glanced toward the door of that room, hoping she would not wake up to this strange and tense night. He did not want his daughter to see the fear that was now filling the air like a heavy cloud. The woman finally lifted her gaze, and her voice came out as a soft whisper. "Thank you for not telling him." Her words trembled, as if each one cost her effort. John wanted to ask who that man was and why she was running from him, but he could see that she was not ready to give answers yet. He poured her a cup of hot tea from the thermos he kept on the small shelf, and she accepted it with hands that were still shaking. She took a sip and closed her eyes for a moment, as if the warmth in the cup was the first comfort she had felt in days. "My name is Anna," she said at last. "I am sorry for bringing trouble to you." John told her his name in return, and said that trouble had already found him the moment she stepped out of that car, so she might as well explain what was happening. Anna hesitated again, glancing at the rain streaking down the small window, as if checking to see if the SUV had returned. Then she leaned closer and spoke in a voice that was almost too low to hear. "I am the wife of a very powerful man," she began, "but my life with him is not what it seems from the outside. People think I live in a golden cage full of comfort, but they do not see the fear, the control, the cold eyes watching every step I take. Tonight, I ran because I could not stay there any longer. I saw something I should not have seen, and now I know he will not let me go." John listened in silence, feeling the weight of her words sink into him. He had heard stories of powerful men who thought they owned everything, including the people around them, but hearing it from her made it real. He asked what she had seen, but Anna only shook her head and said it was too dangerous to speak of yet. The night grew colder, and the wind outside howled through the narrow streets, making the shadows dance on the walls. John knew that keeping her there would put him at risk if the man returned, but a part of him could not push her out into the storm. There was something in her voice, in her eyes, that told him she had been living in fear for a long time, and that she needed someone to stand between her and the danger chasing her. After a while, Anna's breathing slowed, and John thought she might fall asleep in the chair. But then there was a sudden knock on the gate. It was not loud, but it made both of them freeze. John's heart pounded as he stepped to the small window and looked out in the dim light. He saw a man standing outside wearing a dark coat and holding an umbrella. His face was half hidden, but his eyes seemed to be scanning every corner of the gatehouse. John slid the window open, just a little enough to speak without letting the rain in. The man asked politely if he had seen a woman pass by someone matching Anna's description. John felt a drop of sweat roll down his back. Even though the air was cold, he shook his head and said no in the calmest voice he could manage. The man studied him for a moment, then nodded and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. Anna let out a shaky breath and whispered, "They will keep looking. They will not stop until they find me." John realized this was no ordinary problem. This was a hunt, and the woman in his booth was the prey. He asked her where she would go if she could escape. Anna said she had a friend in another city who could hide her, but she had no way to get there without being caught. John thought of his daughter sleeping in the next room and wondered what would happen if these people discovered Anna was here. The thought made his stomach twist. Yet he knew that turning her away now would be the same as handing her over to the danger she feared. The rain began to fade into a light drizzle, and the night grew very still. John walked to the gate and looked out into the empty street, feeling the weight of the choice before him. He could keep his life simple and safe, or he could step into Anna's storm and face whatever came with it. Deep inside, he already knew which choice he would make, though the danger was real. So was the pull to protect her. Inside the booth, Anna sat quietly, her eyes following him as if trying to read his thoughts. John closed the door behind him and gave her a look that told her she was safe for now. But in his heart he knew that safety would not last. The darkness outside was hiding more than rain and shadows. It was hiding eyes, watching, waiting, and closing in. The night was quiet now, but it was the kind of quiet that made every small sound feel louder, the kind that made the hairs on the back of the neck stand up. John could feel it as he sat in the booth with Anna. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy, as if the storm had left behind a warning rather than peace. Anna sat near the small table, her hands wrapped around the warm cup of tea. that had gone cold. Her eyes seemed far away, lost in thoughts. She was not ready to share. John wanted to ask again what she had seen that made her run, but before he could speak, there was the distant sound of an engine. It was slow and steady, and it was getting closer. John stood and moved to the window, his eyes scanning the street in the dim light. And there it was, the same black SUV from earlier, creeping toward the gate like a predator returning to the place had just searched. John's heart began to pound in his chest, each beat louder than the last. He turned to Anna and whispered quickly, "Go to the back room, stay with Lily, and do not make a sound." Anna nodded without a word and moved swiftly, her footsteps barely making a sound as she slipped into the small room, closing the door behind her. John took a deep breath and stepped outside the booth. The SUV stopped just short of the gate, and two men stepped out, both wearing dark jackets, their faces hard and unfriendly. One of them was the man from before. The other was taller, with a scar running from his temple to his jaw. "Evening again," the man in the suit said, his tone calm but cold. "We are still looking for someone, and we think she might be hiding here." He took a step closer, his eyes fixed on John. The tall man with the scar moved to the side, as if checking the shadows around the gatehouse. John felt the weight of the moment pressing on him. He could tell a single wrong move could end badly. "I told you before," John said, his voice steady. "No one like that has passed here tonight." The man in the suit smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. It was the kind that made a person's skin crawl. "Then perhaps you will not mind if we take a look inside," he said, tilting his head toward the booth. John's mind raced. He knew that if they stepped inside, Anna would be found and taken away, and he had no doubt she would never be safe again. He thought of Lily asleep in the back room, and of what these men might do if they discovered both of them. With Anna, the choice was clear, but it was dangerous. "I am sorry," John said. "The booth is for staff only, and without permission from the property owners. I cannot allow anyone inside." The man's smile faded, replaced by a hard, cold stare. "Are you sure you want to make this difficult for us?" he asked slowly. John said nothing, just stood his ground. The tall man with the scar stepped forward, as if ready to push past him, but the man in the suit held up a hand. "Not yet," he said, turning his gaze back to John. "We will be back," he said, his voice low and sharp. "When we return, I hope you will be more helpful." Without another word, they got back into the SUV and drove away, disappearing once more into the night. John stood there for a moment, breathing heavily. He knew they would indeed return, and next time they might not bother with words. He went back inside, and Anna emerged from the back room, her face pale and her hands trembling. "I heard everything," she said. "You should not risk yourself for me. If they find out you are hiding me, they will hurt you and your daughter." John looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "I cannot send you back to them, whatever trouble you are in. You are not facing it alone anymore." Anna's eyes glistened, as if she wanted to speak, but no words came. She simply nodded and sat down, her shoulders slumping with exhaustion. The night passed slowly. Every creak of the wooden walls, every rustle of leaves outside felt like a threat. John barely slept, his mind replaying the man's promise to return by the time morning came. The first light of dawn felt more like a brief pause than safety. He knew that he had stepped into something far more dangerous than he had expected, but he also knew he could not turn back now. When Lily woke up and came out rubbing her eyes, John tried to smile as if everything was normal, but Anna's worried eyes met his over the little girl's head, and they both knew that danger was already moving closer. It was only a matter of time before the gate would no longer be enough to keep it out. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the neighborhood was darker than usual. The air was still, but it carried a quiet tension, like the world was holding its breath. John sat in his booth, watching the empty street, his eyes heavy from a long day, but his mind sharp and restless. He knew they would come back, and that thought kept him from relaxing. Anna sat in the corner of the booth, her knees drawn up to her chest. She had barely spoken since the men left. Her gaze kept drifting to the door, as if she expected it to burst open at any second. Lily was in the small back room, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the danger that was creeping closer with every passing hour. The sound came suddenly, and without warning, a faint metallic clink like metal against metal. It was so soft that most people would have missed it, but John had learned to notice even the smallest sounds. He stood slowly and peered through the window, straining his eyes to see through the darkness. At first there was nothing, then a shadow moved near the far side of the gate. His pulse quickened. He reached for the small flashlight on the table and switched it on, pointing it toward the movement. For a brief moment, the light caught the outline of a man dressed in dark clothes pressed against the fence. The man stepped back quickly, vanishing into the shadows. But John knew what he saw. Someone was out there watching, waiting. He turned to Anna and spoke in a low voice, "Stay inside, do not move, and do not make a sound." She nodded, her face pale with fear. John stepped outside the booth, the cold air wrapping around him like a warning. The street seemed empty, but the feeling of eyes on him was strong. From somewhere behind the tall hedge came a rustling sound. John tightened his grip on the flashlight and called out, "Who is there?" There was no answer, only silence. And then the sound of footsteps running away. He hurried toward the noise, but stopped short when he saw something on the ground, a small piece of cloth caught on the gate's sharp metal edge. It was black like the clothes of the man he had just seen. He picked it up and felt the rough texture between his fingers. Someone had been very close, maybe too close to the booth. He returned inside, locking the door behind him. Anna was still in the corner, her eyes wide. "What did you see?" she asked in a trembling voice. John told her quietly that someone was outside, and they were not just passing by, they were watching him. The rest of the night passed in uneasy silence. Every little sound from the wind or the creak of the wooden walls made Anna flinch, and made John's hand twitch toward the old metal wrench he kept near the door. As a weapon, he knew it would not be much against armed men, but it was better than nothing. Near midnight, another sound came, this time from the back of the booth, where the small window to Lily's room was. John moved fast, pressing his ear to the wall. He could hear the faintest sound of someone trying to open it from the outside. His heart slammed against his ribs. He grabbed the wrench and moved toward the back room, opening the door just enough to see Lily sleeping peacefully and Anna standing frozen near the window. John whispered for Anna to take Lily and move her to the front room. Then he yanked the curtain aside and shone the flashlight through the glass. For a second, he caught the face of a man, his features twisted in surprise. Before he ducked out of sight, John opened the door to the outside, but the intruder was already gone, his footsteps fading into the night. He locked the window tight and pushed the small table against it. Anna held Lily close, her hands shaking. She looked at John with a mix of fear and guilt. "I should leave," she said, her voice breaking. "They will not stop until they find me, and I do not want to bring this danger to your daughter." John shook his head firmly. "You leave now, and they will catch you before you reach the end of the street," he said. "If they want you, they will have to go through me first." Anna's eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing the rest of the night. They sat awake, the three of them huddled together, as the dark hours crawled by. Outside, the world was silent, but John knew that silence was only the space between storms. When dawn finally came, the light felt thin and cold. John stepped outside to check the street. He found fresh footprints in the soft ground near the back fence. They had been close, too close. And if they could get that near without being seen, it meant the danger was worse than he thought. He went back inside, knowing he would need to be ready for whatever came next, because the shadows in the night were not going to disappear. They were going to come back, and soon. The storm had returned, but this time the rain was heavy, and the wind roared like a wild animal. The trees swayed, and their branches scratched against the walls of the booth. John sat at the small table, his eyes on the gate, while Anna sat in the corner, holding Lily close. The air inside was thick with unease, as if they all knew the storm was bringing more than just rain. The first sign came as a faint beam of light cutting through the darkness, headlights moving slowly along the street, the sound of an engine rising and falling with the wind. Then the black SUV appeared again, creeping toward the gate like a hunter closing in on trapped prey. John stood up, his muscles tense, his hand tightening around the metal wrench he had kept near him for days now. The SUV stopped just short of the gate, and this time both doors opened. Two men stepped out, their coats whipping in the wind. One was the man in the suit, the other was the tall man with the scar. Both walked forward without hesitation, their shoes splashing in the puddles. The man in the suit called out loudly, his voice cutting through the storm, "We are coming in." John stepped outside the booth, the rain soaking his uniform. In seconds, his voice steady as he shouted back, "You cannot enter without permission from the property owners." The man in the suit smiled, "That same cold smile. "We warned you last time," he said. "Now we are done asking." The tall man moved first, stepping toward the gate with his hand reaching for the lock. John gripped the wrench and slammed it against the metal post. The sharp sound echoed through the storm, making the man stop. The man in the suit's smile faded. "Enough talk," he said. "Get him." The tall man lunged forward, and the gate rattled under his weight. John swung the wrench hard, catching the man's arm. The tall man cursed and stepped back, but his other hand shot forward, grabbing John by the collar, pulling him toward the bars. John braced himself and pushed back with all his strength. The rain made the ground slippery, and both men struggled for balance. Inside the booth, Anna clutched Lily's shoulders, urging her to stay low and quiet, her heart pounding with every sound of the fight. Outside, she could see shadows moving in the rain, and she knew if John fell, they would come for her next. The tall man roared and swung a heavy punch that grazed John's jaw, sending pain shooting through his head. But John held his ground. He swung the wrench again, aiming low this time, and the man stumbled backward. The man in the suit stepped forward, his voice sharp enough to cut through the wind. "Enough of this," he shouted, and pulled something from his coat, a black metal object that glinted in the lightning. John froze, his eyes fixed on the gun in the man's hand. The storm seemed to vanish for a moment. The only sound, the heavy breathing between them. The man in the suit leveled the gun at John and said, "Step aside now, or you will not see another sunrise." Before John could answer, a bright flash of blue light filled the street. Headlights from another vehicle racing toward the gate. The SUV's driver turned his head just as the new car skidded to a stop, its horn blaring. The sight made the men hesitate, and that moment was enough for John. He swung the wrench with all his strength, knocking the gun from the man's hand. It clattered onto the wet ground and slid toward the side of the road. The tall man shouted and moved to grab it, but the new car's door flew open, and two uniformed officers jumped out, shouting for everyone to freeze, their voices booming even over the storm. The man in the suit backed away, his hands raised, but his eyes still locked on John with a promise of revenge. The tall man hesitated, then slowly stepped back as the officers approached. Anna rushed out of the booth with Lily in her arms, her face pale, but her eyes full of relief. One officer picked up the gun, while the other ordered the two men to stand against the SUV and put their hands on the hood. John's chest rose and fell heavily, his grip on the wrench loosening at last. The officers took the men into custody, explaining that they had been following them after reports of suspicious activity in the area. Anna turned to John, her lips trembling. "You saved us," she said, her voice breaking. But John shook his head. It was not over, not yet. He could see in the man's cold stare, as they were led away, that this fight was not finished. The rain began to ease, and the wind slowed, but the danger still hung in the air like a shadow that refused to leave. John knew that whatever came next would test him more than this night had, because the storm had only just begun, and now he had to prepare for the final one. The morning after the storm, the sky was clear, but John knew the peace would not last. The officers had taken the two men away, yet in his heart he could feel that the powerful man Anna had spoken about would not let this end so easily. Anna sat at the small table, holding a warm cup of tea, while Lily played quietly nearby, though her eyes kept glancing toward the window, as if she expected danger to appear at any moment. Anna's hands were steady now, but her voice was soft when she spoke. "They will come back," she said, "and this time they will not send only two men." John nodded. He had been thinking the same thing, and he knew they could not stay at the booth much longer. The risk to Lily was too great. He asked Anna if she still had the evidence she had mentioned before, the thing that could stop her husband. Anna hesitated, then reached into the small bag she carried and pulled out a black flash drive. "This holds everything," she said, "all the documents, all the recordings. It is enough to destroy him. But I cannot go to the police alone. They will not believe me without protection." John looked at the flash drive in her hand and made his decision. He told her they would go together to the main police station in the city where her friend worked, and they would hand over the evidence. But they would have to move fast and be careful. The journey would be dangerous. Anna agreed, though the fear in her eyes showed she knew exactly how dangerous it could be. That night they left the booth. John carried Lily in his arms, while Anna walked beside him. The streetlights flickered as they moved quickly toward the bus stop. The air was cold, and the world around them seemed too quiet too still. They reached the stop and waited. The minutes stretched like hours, until finally the bus appeared, its headlights glowing in the dark. They boarded and sat near the back. John kept his eyes on the windows, scanning for any sign of danger. For a while the ride was smooth, the sound of the engine and the rocking of the bus almost enough to make Lily fall asleep. But then John noticed a black car following them. It kept its distance, but never turned away. His grip on the seat tightened. He leaned toward Anna and whispered, "They are behind us." She nodded, her face pale, and clutched the bag with the flash drive tighter. When the bus stopped at the next station, John made a sudden choice. They got off quickly and slipped into the narrow streets of the market, where the lights were bright and the noise of sellers filled the air. Weaving between stalls, they moved fast, trying to disappear into the crowd. But the black car had stopped too, and two men were now pushing through the market, searching for them. John led Anna and Lily through a small alley that opened onto a busy road, and there they found a taxi. He pushed them inside and told the driver to go to the central police station as fast as possible. The driver nodded and pulled into traffic, the city lights flashing past the windows. But in the side mirror, John could see the black car again, weaving through traffic, trying to catch up. The taxi raced through the streets, turning sharply at corners. But the black car stayed close. John's heart pounded. As they neared the police station, its tall building standing like a fortress in the distance. Just when it seemed they might make it, the black car pulled alongside, blocking their path. The doors flew open, and two men stepped out, one of them holding a metal pipe. John got out of the taxi and stood between the men and Anna, his body tense, ready for whatever came. The man with the pipe swung hard, but John dodged and pushed him back. The other man rushed forward, but John caught him with a shove, sending him into the side of the taxi. The driver shouted for help, and within moments armed officers came running from the station, their shouts filling the street. The men tried to flee, but were quickly caught and forced to the ground. Inside the station, Anna handed the flash drive to the chief officer, her voice steady as she told everything she knew. The chief listened carefully, then promised her protection, and said the evidence was more than enough to arrest her husband and bring down his illegal network. For the first time, Anna's shoulders seemed to relax, as if the weight she carried for years had finally begun to lift. Days later, the news spread that the powerful man had been arrested along with several of his associates. The media called it one of the biggest cases of the year, and John's name appeared in the reports, not just as a witness, but as the man who had risked his life to protect the woman who brought justice. Back at the gatehouse, John returned to his post. But life was different now. People greeted him with smiles and thanks, and he felt quiet pride when Lily told her friends, "My dad is a hero." Anna often visited, bringing food for them to share, and sometimes staying for long talks in the quiet evenings. Over time, those talks turned into something deeper, a bond built from danger, trust, and gratitude. John had started as a simple gatekeeper, living a quiet life, but now he was something more in the eyes of his daughter, in the heart of the woman he had saved, and in the truth of his own soul. He was a man who had faced fear and chosen to stand tall, a man who had gone from gatekeeper to hero and would never be the same again.